In 1700, Scotland lost £400,000, one-fifth of its entire wealth, chasing a colonial fantasy that killed nearly 2,000 people. Within just one generation, a bankrupt nation with no parliament and barely 1 million souls would ignite a revolution across the Atlantic. How did a country on its knees become the intellectual engine of American freedom? The answer reveals a forgotten chain of disasters and ideas that changed the world, and exposes the secret Scottish origins of the United States. Ships limped back into Scottish ports with rotten hulls and barely living men. The Darien colony, meant to turn Scotland into an empire, had become a floating graveyard. Letters from the survivors described air so foul that even birds dropped dead. By 1700, the dream was finished. 2,000 men had died in Panama, and the nation was left with a debt of £400,000, enough to cripple every merchant, farmer, and noble family from the borders to the Highlands. The shock ran deeper than lost money. Scotland's pride, already fragile, collapsed under the weight of failure. The country's leaders faced a stark choice: cling to a ruined independence or accept England's offer of union. In 1707, with coffers empty and hope gone, the Scottish Parliament voted itself out of existence. The Act of Union dissolved 3 centuries of sovereignty with the scratch of a pen. For many Scots, it felt like a funeral. The nation's ancient laws, its parliament, even its flag, were folded into something new: Great Britain. Beneath the surface, resentment simmered. The price of union was sweetened with English gold, bribes and bailouts for the elite, but little comfort for the thousands ruined by Darien. The poet Robert Burns would later call it the sale of Scotland for English gold. Yet the alternative, starvation and bankruptcy, left few choices. But history did not end with the loss. Out of the ashes of failed empire and lost parliament, something unexpected began to stir. Edinburgh, a city of 60,000, started to buzz with new energy. Coffee houses filled with debate. Booksellers did brisk business in the latest pamphlets. The world took notice. Voltaire, writing from France, famously declared, "We look to Scotland for all our ideas of civilization." A nation that had lost everything except its mind now turned inward. With no colonies to chase and no parliament to defend, Scotland's best minds began to ask what truly mattered. The next chapter would not be written in gold or blood, but in ideas. In 1696, Scottish lawmakers passed a simple but radical law. Every parish, no matter how remote, must build a school. Landowners paid the bills. The kirk watched over the lessons. By the early 1700s, Scotland, this tiny, battered country, still reeling from economic disaster, quietly built the most literate society in Europe. By 1750, about 70% of Scottish men and 45% of women could read and write, far ahead of England's rates. In the lowlands, reading the Bible was as common as tending sheep. In the Highlands, even crofters' children learned their letters in smoky, one-room schoolhouses. But Scotland didn't stop at reading. 4 universities, St Andrews, Glasgow, Aberdeen, and Edinburgh, served a population of just 1 million. England, with 5 times as many people, had only Oxford and Cambridge. These Scottish universities broke with tradition. Instead of drilling Latin poetry and ancient history, professors taught science, mathematics, law, medicine, and moral philosophy. The curriculum was practical, modern, and open to new ideas. Students learned about Newton's physics, the latest discoveries in anatomy, and the workings of markets and governments. They debated questions about liberty, justice, and the common good. This education system didn't just produce ministers and schoolmasters. It created a new kind of thinker, curious, skeptical, and hungry for progress. Coffee houses in Edinburgh and Glasgow buzzed with arguments about how society should work. Booksellers stocked the latest pamphlets from London, Paris, and Amsterdam, but also the works of Scottish professors who were just down the street. By the 1730s, a generation of homegrown philosophers and scientists began to appear. Over the next 60 years, their ideas would ripple out from Scotland to the rest of the world. The Scottish Enlightenment was not an accident. It was built on the machinery of parish schools and a university network that welcomed talent from every corner of the country. A bankrupt nation, with no empire and no parliament, invested in minds instead of armies. The result was a society ready to challenge old certainties and export new ones. The next great leap would begin in a classroom at the University of Glasgow, where a young professor named Francis Hutcheson stood ready to ask what government was truly for. Ideas did not respect borders. In the decades after Scotland lost its parliament, 3 Scottish philosophers wrote books that would cross the Atlantic and quietly shape a revolution. In 1725, Francis Hutcheson, teaching at the University of Glasgow, published a treatise with a phrase that would echo through history: that we may pursue our own happiness is the foundation of a right to liberty. Hutcheson argued that rights are not gifts from kings, but natural and unalienable, and that people have a duty to resist tyranny. His lectures, delivered without notes, drew crowds of students who called him the never-to-be-forgotten Hutcheson. The language of rights and happiness, first heard in Glasgow classrooms, found its way into the American Declaration half a century later, though Jefferson never named his source. Adam Smith, Hutcheson's former student, took the idea of liberty into the world of commerce. In March 1776, as tensions boiled in the American colonies, Smith published The Wealth of Nations. He described an invisible hand guiding markets and argued that the pursuit of individual gain could benefit society as a whole. 4 months later, the Declaration of Independence was signed in Philadelphia. The timing was more than a coincidence. Smith's ideas about economic freedom and limited government became the backbone of American capitalism. David Hume, born in Edinburgh in 1711, challenged every tradition he met. In 1748, he published an inquiry concerning human understanding and questioned the divine right of kings, insisting that reason and evidence, not authority, should rule. Hume's skepticism armed colonial thinkers with tools to question British rule. In Edinburgh, they called him the fattest philosopher, but his ideas cut sharper than any sword. Across the Atlantic, his doubts became the seeds of revolution. In 1768, a Scottish minister named John Witherspoon crossed the Atlantic and took charge of a small college in New Jersey. Princeton's board wanted a leader who could train young men for the pulpit. Instead, they got a force of nature. Witherspoon brought the Scottish Enlightenment to America's doorstep, filling lecture halls with the language of liberty and resistance. He taught that government is a trust, not a birthright of kings, and that citizens must safeguard their own freedom. James Madison arrived at Princeton in 1769, so eager to learn that he finished his degree in 2 years, then stayed on for an extra year of private study with Witherspoon himself. The father of the Constitution absorbed lessons drawn straight from Scottish philosophy: natural rights, moral sense, and the duty to question authority. Witherspoon's influence did not stop with Madison. In less than 30 years, his students included 1 future president, 21 senators, 39 congressmen, and 12 governors. He signed the Declaration of Independence as both a clergyman and a college president, his Scottish accent echoing in the halls of Congress as he called for revolution against the very empire that had swallowed his homeland. James Wilson, another son of Scotland, arrived in Philadelphia in 1765. He had studied at 3 Scottish universities before seeking his fortune in the colonies. On July 4, 1776, Wilson added his name to the Declaration, a Scot helping to declare independence from Britain. 11 years later, at the Constitutional Convention, Wilson spoke 168 times, shaping the presidency, the courts, and the Electoral College. He is one of only 6 people in history to sign both the Declaration and the Constitution. The irony runs deep. In 1707, Scotland surrendered its sovereignty. By 1776, Scottish-born leaders were engraving the ideals of their lost nation into the founding documents of a new one. America's blueprint was drafted by men whose minds were shaped in Scottish classrooms, carrying the intellectual legacy of a country that could not save itself, but change the world. American freedoms still echo ideas born in Scottish lecture halls, proof that influence rarely respects borders. In a world debating identity and rights, the origin of liberty remains a living question. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin far from where they end. What do you think? Does history ever really stay put?